Him. Him. Hey there, TikTok. What's going on there in these TikTok streets? Look, guys, things are not great right now in the US. Today is the 5th of July, 250 plus 1, if you're counting from the viewpoint of a colonial mindset. But I always think of things in terms of, when were my ancestors here? When did my ancestors arrive? And for us, our creation story is here. The very first person of my ancestral line arrived here in the Pacific Northwest, was lowered to the ground on a cedar rope. So I know some of y'all like to believe that your first person was created from the rib of another person, or like somehow, I don't know what your belief is. I wouldn't presume to understand. But as far as 250 years of a country goes, it always seems so small to me, because the people who I come from, my direct ancestral line, is well documented to have been here for tens of thousands of years. And our oral history says our very first person was created here. We were lowered from the sky. So when we talk about star nations, it's important to understand where the concept comes from, because it's another example of colonial thought having adopted indigenous belief systems and appropriated it. Star nations, my ancestors are star nations. My ancestors are. Our creation story says that my very first ancestor was lowered to the earth here. So, even if, let's say as a for instance, your first ancestor here came from the Mayflower, okay? And let's just say that your ancestors have been here for almost 500 years and not just 250 years. Well, then take into account and compare my ancestors who say our first person was created here. Our very first person was created here. The story of our very existence originates here. And there's nothing to disprove it. If you look at our claims and you look at our ancestry and even the DNA, we represent a unique group of people. We're actual Star Nation people. And it's difficult to comprehend that and think about it, because we have these colonial thought patterns that are built around people who had enormous privilege and wealth and influence, not necessarily intellect, understanding, and wisdom. They weren't necessarily the smartest people. They just were the most powerful people. So, that the fact that we have all of these so-called founding fathers that created this document that governs our country doesn't determine where they got all of those thought patterns from. Because a lot of those beliefs and systems of humanity and equality and, the real principles of liberty and freedom came from the great peace treaty under the white pine. I believe it's like the Seneca and the Hidatsuna, the great treaty of peace. And if you're from the Northeast, you're probably much more familiar with that than I am, because I only partially understand it, but from my understanding, the people in the Northeast had already come to this constitutional agreement amongst each other that created peace among their nations. And the principles of the United States Constitution that created peace among the colonies adopted their, even word for word structure from the Seneca and the Hidatsa and the Iroquois and like all those Northeast nations. And this stuff isn't even controversial. It's well known. It's documented. And again, these people who we look to as our founding fathers, they weren't necessarily the smartest people. We're told that they were so smart, and we're kind of brought into this thought pattern of, oh, they had such great ways of thinking. The same thing with Maslow. We kind of look to these great pioneers of thought, but in reality, these beliefs and these understandings and principles were well known among indigenous people and only incorporated into colonial thought after colonization. So, and again, this stuff isn't even controversial, right? This is stuff that's just well known. The principles of self-actualization, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're taken from indigenous people in Montana. I'm trying to remember their nations. I don't want to get it wrong. But, when we think of the great minds and the great framers of our freedom and framers of our thought, a lot of them just straight appropriated indigenous thought. It's even the same with taking a shot at the moon, where women are deprived of the fact that they were the calculators of the time. We look at, the astronauts who flew through the space. They put their actual bodies on the line, but it was phalanxes of women, particularly black women, who were relegated to the position of secretary and therefore inconsequential, who did the math to make that happen. So we know history is constantly being rewritten to lionize the patriarchy, and it's absurd. It's just absurd. Hey guys, I'm wearing glasses today so I can see who's in here. Welcome in, Big Rec, User, Thomas, Just, Candy, Shock and Dawn, Sue. I'm just talking a little bit about colonial thought and how people are told one system of belief and one thought pattern to uphold the patriarchy, and how it's just ridiculous because we know that it's not true. So in the instance of the founding fathers, we're told that they're so intellectually superior and they could anticipate a time when tyranny would arrive, and that they wanted to create an alliance of peace, where really they took their constitution from the Iroquois and the Seneca, the Hidatsa. There was already a constitution and a Bill of Rights and a Treaty of Peace that had been established where the colonizers arrived. And again, the colonial forefathers, when they arrived here, they wouldn't have even been able to survive if it wasn't for indigenous farming. Hey, welcome in, Donnie, Thomas, Rusty. I'm just talking a little bit about how we're told one thing while something else is different. But while the history and actual reality is different from what we're told a certain thing to create a belief system that doesn't reflect reality. So one of those realities I was thinking about is, how long have hospitals existed in the United States? Okay. And then how long have midwives existed in the United States? we talk about modern science and doctoring and, physicians as if they're some great thing. And in reality, the cultures and societies who existed here before the existence of hospitals and doctoring somehow managed to birth children for thousands of years. We had populations in the millions here and established trade routes and villages and cities all across this country, including like massive orchards and mega structures. And yet we're told that we're savages when we had like suspension bridges, we had rubber, we had irrigation and vaccination and injections. Like we were the people who invented things like all kinds of stuff. Anyway, the people here had modern medicine for our nations ahead of colonial thought. And now we have a hard time even getting access to medicine. A lot of times the people who deliver the medicine are prejudiced. And they do things like you are a patient in a hospital and they cut your hair, involuntarily cut your hair. It's happened over and over again. Or honestly, and let's be real here, indigenous people have been forced to sterilization without consent or knowledge. The medicine system here, a lot of it was pioneered on people who were, quote, mentally ill. And the entire mental health system in this country was pioneered and built around depriving indigenous knowledge keepers of their ability to speak about what is going on. Hey guys, I'm just talking about how we're given these ways of thinking and told what to believe, and a lot of it serves the patriarchy and isn't even based in reality. It's not even true stuff. We're just told to believe these things, and then it's not real. It's not real. We're being fed a pack of lies. Obviously things that are like peer-reviewed scientific fact, we can look at that and say, this is happening, this is verifiable, right? Documentable. But the issue is, look at how scientists gain their funding. Look at what it takes to be able to publish a study. And you start bumping into people like the Gates Foundation and these other mega corrupt institutions who are the only means to gain access to funding to be even able to publish a study in the first place. And then if the funders don't like your study, they just toss it out. They just toss out your study. You don't even get your study published because it goes against what the people who are funding it wanted to find. So, we have a very limited data set, and a lot of people just yesterday, for whatever reason, were chanting things like USA and believing things like we're number one. But the reality is we're way behind the rest of the world, the developed world, so-called, in all manners of our education. Hey, thanks for the likes. We have so many failures of our education system, and then people go around acting like they're the most educated people on the planet when the available information that they can even access is misleading or straight up false. Indigenous people, for instance, had advanced societies here. We had a constitution and a Bill of Rights that the colonizers adopted and only were able to find their own peace inside of their colonies by using indigenous knowledge. So when we think about freedom and liberty and what it means to have constitutional rights, we're not told it's because of the Seneca and Iroquois people and the Confederacy of the Great Treaty of Peace. We're not told that. We're told that, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams and, Abraham Lincoln And it's just not even true. It's just not even true. We're told all of these things that aren't even true just to uphold a thought pattern that's based on lies. And then we continue to tell those lies to the children. Hey guys, I appreciate you being here. Sorry I'm moving around so much. I just have to water in these holes because apparently that's what you do. I'm kind of new to this whole thing. Yeah, I don't TikTok very much either. I'm new to TikTok Live, so thank you for being here. If you have any questions about what's going on or any comments, whether you agree with me or disagree, welcome to say what you want. At this point, I don't have any mods. I don't have any comments either, so the two go just fine together. But yeah, when we talk about the principles of freedom and liberty and justice, a lot of those principles were directly taken from indigenous nations. And it's never written up that way on the 4th of July flyer, like, celebrate the 250th anniversary of cultural appropriation of freedom. Because instead they want you to believe that the colonists somehow on their own came up with all of these ideas about freedom and liberty that they weren't able to come up with for however many thousands of years, 2,000 years of so-called Roman theory and Greek philosophy. After 2,000 years of Greek philosophy, they hadn't come up with this stuff. The only reason that these principles were adopted into the United States is because they directly appropriated them from indigenous beliefs. And it's wild to me that people are lied to about that, because the entire foundation of your thought processes are created around a lie. And it's just about impossible to imagine a world, like I said, where they're like, celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Constitution and Bill of Rights written by the Iroquois Confederacy. You're not going to see like Iroquois leaders. I don't even know their name. I'm ashamed at this point because I don't even know the names of the leaders who came up with the Great Treaty of Peace under the Iroquois Confederacy. I'd look it up, but right now I'm doing some watering in these holes. But thanks for being here, guys. I'm just talking about cultural appropriation and how we never are told the real truth, and how we just have like this history of lies that are perpetuated against us. And for whatever reason, we're brought to believe that liberty and freedom are granted by the Constitution, which was created by slave owners. Like, when you start to do the math on it, it doesn't really add up. Like, why would these bigoted, patriarchal, quote, landowners want to grant liberty and freedom? Which is why they calculated the value of a person of color into the Constitution and gave them a lesser value than a property owning person. And why they declared my ancestors merciless Indian savages. It's just wild to me, because here they refer to us directly in their founding documents as merciless Indian savages, and yet the only reason that their Constitution and Bill of Rights exist is through appropriation of a civilized society that indigenous people created. Our culture here in the Pacific Northwest is so strong and beautiful, they banned it by law. Potluck culture, gift culture, mutual aid. And when people talk about gauging the wealth of a person by how much they give away, that specifically was our society here. Still is. People still have potlucks and giveaways. A lot of capitalist culture is creeping in, and people even are MAGA inside of my relatives, which is embarrassing, because the same thing that was done to us just in my uncle's lifetime they now want to see done to other people, and it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. If you're watching Uncle, you gotta figure some stuff out, because MAGA will do to you what you're crowing about them doing to our relatives from the South. Like, we know that we had trade routes here in the Pacific Northwest that reach all the way down to Central and South America because of excavations where our trade routes had camps, and they were able to dig up the campfires and find stones that were quarried in Central and South America. So they're able to do these core samples or whatever, where they dig down and they'll go layer by layer, testing the carbon dating the wood in the different layers of the campfire. Because what happens is we'll have a campfire at the same place. We'll have a campfire at the same place for thousands of years. So the archaeologists can go over there and through science carbon date the wood, figure out when that wood was alive and growing, and then they can also look at the stones from inside of the compost pile or from inside of the campfire and determine that where those stones came from. So there's stones here in the Pacific Northwest that were quarried and only exist in Central and South America from thousands of years ago. So the I-5, if you're ever going up the I-5, you can be pretty sure we had a trade route there existing before, what's his name? I just learned the name of like this horrific colonizer who came through and massacred people all throughout the Northwest and the West Coast. His name was John Fremont. John Fremont probably used our existing trade routes to plan his massacres and went all up and down the West Coast doing massacre after massacre. I mean, that's the stuff I think about, right? We had existing trade routes here. We had existing trade routes here for thousands of years. It's not like the I-5 and the I-90, I-35. I don't know what interstate you live on. Whatever interstate you live on, it's a pretty high likelihood that interstate was built on existing trade routes, which we already had here. And the idea that 250 years of colonization is somehow something great. No, for thousands of years, there was already a trade route wherever you're stuck in traffic right now. I just get taught one version of history that isn't even based on reality. And we pass that lie along to our children, and it's perpetuated through generations. Generations and generations of people are told the same lie, and it somehow becomes the truth. Even though we know what the real truth is, somehow we still perpetuate the same lie. And that's the situation with 250 years of the United States of America. For 250 years, we're told John Adams and Abraham Lincoln, and the story of the Ride of Liberty. That what do they call it? Paul Revere's midnight ride or whatever. We're taught to look to all these people that appropriated their land and literally would die. Okay, this is something that I think about every single day because I recognize the truth. I like to eat. Okay, eating is part of my lifestyle. And in order for me to eat, somebody else grows my food. I do not grow my own food. And whoever that person is who grows my food, it's a very high likelihood that is an indigenous person. It's highly unlikely that any kind of a European person is growing my food. it's much more likely that person is indigenous from Central or South America. It's indigenous people, okay? We're having all of these, again, reframing of the truth to say, oh, these migrants, these immigrants. Well, let me tell you, farm workers, a lot of them have indigenous ancestry. A lot of the people who are being picked up by ICE and Border Patrol don't even speak Spanish or English. They only speak their own indigenous language. So what's happening right now with children, pregnant children inside of concentration camps in the USA, a lot of them are indigenous children. So if you have a grandmother who is a Native American princess, don't be too surprised if you do a little bit of digging and find out that she actually was a slave or inside of a religious institution or somehow great. Because that's what's happening right now. There's a bunch of half indigenous, half colonizer children who are being born inside of concentration camps, and we don't even know what's happening to the babies. We don't even know what's happening to the babies. And again, like I just was saying, a lot of these children, they're from indigenous nations in Central and South America. They don't even speak Spanish or English. They only speak their own indigenous language. So how are they supposed to ever bear witness against an ICE detention camp guard when they don't even speak English or Spanish? And again, where are the babies being born from the children in concentration camps? Children aren't allowed to consent. For a child to become pregnant, it must be non-consensual. You cannot consensually impregnate a child. Every time it's non-consensual. So every one of those pregnant children in the United States concentration camps was subject to non-consensual intercourse. Where's their 250 years of freedom? Where's their constitutional rights? How can you be patriotic towards that? Hey guys, I'm talking about some heavy stuff. You know, my streams tend to be about why things are bad right now in the United States. I'm not here to sugarcoat things or kind of make it easier for you to feel comfortable with the way things are. I'm angry about the way things are. You should be angry too. It's not okay. There should not be pregnant children. There should not be pregnant children inside of concentration camps. Children cannot consent to become pregnant. None of the pregnant children inside of the concentration camps were legally allowed to make the choice to become pregnant. They only became pregnant through criminal activity by the guards of those concentration camps. Why isn't the media saying that? Why isn't the media saying the children became pregnant through non-consensual intercourse? Why are you so quiet about that, the media? It's like, oh, we don't have anything to say about the billionaires who were doing the same thing to children at Epstein Island and in Minnesota and at the Zorro Ranch and in Paris and in New York and Manhattan. Like, they're so quiet about the Miami sex island that happens right now. They're so quiet about the concentration camp sex islands. Let's call it what it is. Because for those prison guards, they're doing the exact same thing that the president did with Bill Gates and with Jay-Z, Jay-Z and all these other people who went out there. All of those criminals who went out there. And the weird part is, That stuff's all documented, okay? It's not even conjecture. It's in legal documents filed by the banks. Those things cost huge amounts of money. You can't just go to a private sex island for free. It costs a huge amount of money. That's why there are flight logs. But there's also bank records of wire transactions between the billionaires where they paid for their flights to the sex islands. So, again, if you or I do a wire transaction for a sex act, you go to jail. It's a crime. But when billionaires do it, the media doesn't even talk about it. And these prison guards are doing the exact same thing. Like I said, there's no consensual impregnation of children. Every child who is pregnant had non-consensual intercourse. And our prisons, our concentration camps in the USA have pregnant children. We have pregnant children in our concentration camps. Again, if you have a grandmother who was a Cherokee princess, the reason you have a Cherokee princess grandmother is because your grandmother was in a concentration camp and some prison guard made it so you could exist on this planet. Sorry to inform you, but that's the pattern of behavior that we have in this country. If you don't know your ancestry, and your ancestry has some indigenous familial ties in it, well, look at the modern course of indigenous parentage, where they won't even tell us why these children are pregnant in concentration camps. You might have some idea why you don't know what your ancestry is. It's not even like the first time it happened, right? They did this before. It's the same thing they always do. This isn't conjecture. When the Nazis run concentration camps, they do medical experimentation. They were doing medical experimentation on women just 10 years ago, just 8 years ago. Under Trump 1.0, they were doing medical experimentation, sterilizations on women inside of these camps. What are they doing with the babies? What are they doing with the babies of children inside of concentration camps? Things are not good in the U.S. I don't understand how you can be patriotic towards that stuff. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know how anybody can be patriotic towards a country that maintains concentration camps, but a country that maintains concentration camps with pregnant children, that's some next level sadistic shit right there. It's messed up. People are out there having barbecues. They're out there having get-togethers and raising the flag. Like, how do you raise your flag over your house? And then that's the same flag that flies over concentration camps. If your flag and the flag that's flying over concentration camps are the same flag, how do you salute that? There's this guy, Jason Watson, Major Jason Watson from the U.S. Air Force. And he went to, I'm not sure if it was the Lincoln Memorial or which, he went to one of those buildings that you can easily go to and stood in protest calling for the president to be impeached and was arrested because he was in his uniform, and you're not allowed to, in your uniform, hold political opinions, which is just wild to me. But because, if your country has become a tyrannical country, if your country has concentration camps, for instance, you're not supposed to stand up for that. You're not supposed to salute for that. You know what I'm saying? You actually have a civic duty, if you're some sort of a patriot, to stand against a country that has concentration camps. You're not supposed to be in favor of that. It's explicitly bad. So, I wasn't celebrating yesterday. I don't understand why people celebrate the 4th of July. Like, if you had a country whose history you could be proud of, or a country whose actual modern day you could be proud of, yes, go for it. But honestly, we have a lot to be ashamed of in the United States right now. And until we act appropriately towards the history of this country and recognize the reality that we live in, sorry guys, I just got restricted. Alright, it says I have a violation warning flagged for misinformation. Good work, guys. This is for educational purposes, and anything that I say here is for the purposes of future generations to understand what might be happening. You can easily find the information that I'm talking about inside of the TikTok shop. There's plenty of history books in the TikTok shop for you to read about the information that I'm giving out. It's not controversial, it doesn't have anything to do with unsettled fact. It's easy for anyone to look up. There's plenty of history books in the TikTok shop that will teach you the same thing that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about some sort of uncertain, unclarified, unverified information. It's all available in the TikTok shop. Anybody can read about it in the TikTok shop if you want to. So, I'm going to end the live right now because I wasn't expecting that restriction, and I don't really want to get a strike. But I'll come back on and talk more about real historical facts that are easily verified from documents that you can find in books in the TikTok shop. And I do appreciate the likes, I appreciate the follows, the comments, and the heart knees or whatever. It looks like there's people in here. I'll talk to you again really soon.